Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Consumed by Grace podcast. We are here for Season 3, Episode 2. We are your hosts. I'm Pastor Henry.
I'm Pastor Brooke. Sorry, I had to get a whoop whoop in there.
I didn't give enough space for the whoop whoop. I apologize.
Give me room for my whoop whoop.
It caught me off guard.
Welcome to our life.
Yep. And we are here to talk about the Bible and specifically give some history, give some context, give some more information about the Bible. I've been leading a class on that, and we've been doing a bit of it's funny, it's both somewhat surface level and also somewhat deep dive-ish. It just it has the moments of doing both. And we wanted to bring a little bit of that to our audience here.
Yeah, and I think as you have conversations about the Bible, it's such a complex book that you get to decide how deep do we want to go in this conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's probably why it ends up that way.
Yeah. So it's fun, and that's a very good way to put that. It always depends on who's there, the conversations you have, what piques your interest. And so today we're going to talk about, what version do I use? Because people have opinions.
Oh, do they?
They do.
Wow.
They do. There's a great story, and at this point in time, I think it's come into the status of legends. I don't know that anyone's actually ever seen this happen, but there's supposedly in the United Methodist Church, each conference has an annual conference.
Yeah.
And it's annual. So we have that once a year, and supposedly there was and in some stories it's a minister, in some stories it's a lay person who got up and would ask that the conference should vote to make the King James Bible, the King James Version of the Bible, the standard Bible for our United Methodist churches, because those are the words Jesus spoke.
Oh, bless. Well, that was in our... Is that real?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it's a legend at this point in time. I hope that's a legend. Now, we know people have... I'm sure there has been someone who has said that. I've never actually found someone who was there when it happened. It's just kind of one of those stories. Mm-hmm. So people have opinions. They have opinions. A lot of us grew up on King James. King James rightfully has a very special place in a lot of our hearts.
Sure.
And even today, if you go to a funeral here in the South, or some of your special services, you're going to hear scriptures like the 23rd Psalm, especially read in that King James, because it's just beautiful language.
Yeah. So, Henry, why do we have so many? A lot of us were raised on King James or even the New King James. But so why do we have so many different translations? Because I don't use that now. That's what I was raised with, but that's not the Bible that I typically use or go to first now. So why do we have so many translations? And how do we decide which one we want to use?
That's a good question. And you have to get back to the fact that most of us know this, but we forget.
Yeah.
And it's always worth remembering. The Bible, in its original form, was not written in English.
Yeah.
The Bible was not written in English. Repeat that because we have to say it's just easy to forget because all of us have had the Bible our whole life and we're used to it in English. So it's hard to remember that, this is not its original language. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew.
Yeah.
The New Testament was originally written in Greek. So just if you're curious, I did bring my... So this is the Old Testament. This is the New Testament. This is Hebrew. This is Greek. So this is the original language. And so what happens is, for those of you who've ever taken a foreign language, you understand there's not always a one-to-one comparison when you're translating something. Some words can have multiple meanings, and we really find it in these languages. That Hebrew was such a poetic language, and there was so much more emphasis on letters and syllables than we do so in English. So there can often be a wide range of things, and even words that are strung together that end up in like an idiom that is saying something that the literal words don't actually mean.
Yeah.
We can think of that. One of my favorite phrases, or actually there's a couple favorite phrases from early in my ministry that I learned. One is, fine as frog hair split three ways. Mm-hmm. What does that even mean?
A, it doesn't mean anything, and B, does not translate.
Does not translate. That was my second favorite. My favorite, though, if I was any better, I would be twins.
Okay.
I love that. I have no earthly idea what that means and how to. But so Hebrew had that too. Greek had that too. We don't always know what the best way to translate that is, and so people often talk about, I want a solid translation, not something that's an interpretation, and I'll get into what they mean by that in just a little bit more. But truly, every translation is an interpretation. Somebody, whether it's a particular scholar like Eugene Peterson with The Message, or a group of scholars like the translation committees of the NIV, the NRSV, the ESV, the New American Standard, NASB, all of these different things are making interpretive decisions on the way they choose to translate. And so people have opinions.
Sure, yeah.
And because they have different opinions, that's why things look a little bit different.
Yeah.
King James became very influential because that was the first major English translation. King James ordered it. It was at a time when he was wanting to separate a bit from the Latin that was more widely used in other churches, and he commissioned a group of scholars to do translations to make it in English, and even to make it sound right a bit in English. Which then gets into translation philosophies. And there are two basic categories that then people can use a mix of. The first one you have is formal equivalence. And when you think of formal equivalence, think of literal translation, or think of word for word. Yep. In other words, you take a word, you translate that word. You take a word, you translate that word. Now what can be interesting, and I'm sorry, this is going to get a little bit more into English grammar than maybe we were ready for, but Greek, Hebrew are inflected languages. So you might have one single word, but that word can contain multiple different words in it because of the part of speech it is.
Okay.
Because it's a past perfect tense verb. It has several extra words with it. And sometimes, interpreting what that modifier is supposed to be. It's supposed to be shall, it's supposed to be will, it's supposed to, may. All of those different kinds of things come into that. So those are the kind of interpretive decisions that you have to make. But formal is trying its best to do a word for word translation. That's very good as it's going for accuracy to the original language, because their focusing is how do we make sure we're translating the original language as accurately as possible.
Yeah. And then you get into some nuance with that, right? Because we can translate things exactly as and as close as possible, but we lose some of the contextual aspects of what those words actually get into.
Sure, because you're trying to be so literal to what it says. y'all probably heard the phrase or maybe even seen the movie Lost in Translation. So something that should have come across in a certain way gets lost in translation.
Yeah.
The other thought, or the other way to do it, is called dynamic equivalence, and that is more of a thought for thought. So you're trying to take the thought, the idea behind what they were saying, which also means, in addition to, understanding language, studying linguistics, you also need to be into some historical study, some context to know some of what was going into the writing of that, to be able to accurately communicate the idea behind that. And so, but by going thought for thought, that's where you can get paraphrase. So a paraphrase is taking something, and you're not worried necessarily about accuracy in the literal sense. You're more accuracy of the idea, because what you're really concerned about is that the reader read and get the same idea from something that the original hearer would have.
Yeah. And so what we're really getting at is there a right or wrong way to translate? Well, not way to translate. Is there a right or wrong translation that we should use?
In my personal opinion, no.
Okay.
It comes down to preference, and it also comes down to what you're using it for, which is, to me, a helpful distinction. If you're going to go for a study, if you're wanting to do either academic work or just you're serious about Bible study, you need to go with a more formal equivalence, word for word kind of thing. Some good examples of that are, let's say, the NASB, the NRSV or the RSV, the ESV, King James. That's what they were going for, modern English version. Now some of those, that doesn't mean they totally get rid of the dynamic equivalence. Sometimes they will use that in certain spots where something is just so clunky.
Yeah.
But by and large, they are more formal. They are more academic.
Yeah.
When you get into those that are going for more of the paraphrase version, that's where you get Eugene Peterson's The Message. You see that the Amplified Bible even did something really fun where they would pick one, but then they would have the other in parentheses, so you could see the other possible way you could have said that, which is interesting, but they can also be clunky to read. The Good News Bible, the CEV, the Contemporary English Version, is another example of more on the paraphrase side of things. And then you even had some that really tried to kind of merge those two things, and they would be, in some areas you'll find they're very literal, and some they're going word for word, and then others they're going more dynamic. They're going for more thought to thought, and some of those are the NIV, the Common English Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and the TINIV, even though that was only out for a little bit, and then they just rolled it back into the NIV, basically. And so there's a lot of that. You also have to be, just put a disclaimer here. Some of this also comes down to publishing rights. And every now and again you'll see someone who does. I don't want to say I'm questioning their scholarship, because they put in they have people who put in the scholarly work, but then sometimes the Bible gets released because at one point in time they had access to this, and then later someone filed a copyright and they weren't able to license it in the same way. Or it was going to be too expensive or something like that. Because never forget, while I think most of these people are doing it for the right reasons, they're also selling Bibles.
Yeah, absolutely, making money, right?
So that comes into a little bit, and we can't pretend like that's not there.
Well, and I think that's why it's important to have conversations like what we're doing today to decide, well, who do I need to, trust to get my translation from? I had a fun assignment in school maybe a year or so ago, and it was talking about Bible translations, and we had to write a paper with the prompt of, okay, you have a person who's a part of your congregation who wants a new Bible and they are trying to decide what translation is good for them. And so we had to go through and pick some translations and compare them and find reasons why or why not they should be able to use this one or that one. And so as people are watching this or listening to it, wherever you get your podcasts, and they're trying to decide,
And available on YouTube.
That's right. If they're trying to decide, okay, well, how do I start? How do I dig into finding what is correct for me specifically? Any thoughts, tips, actions that maybe they should take?
Yeah, I do. So, for one thing, you can do a little bit of online research. You don't have to wait until you're in a bookstore and there's this giant wall of Bibles and you just walk away because it's so overwhelming. It reminds me, I may have told this story on the podcast before. If I have, forgiven me. But when Kelly and I were engaged and were doing all the things, getting ready for our marriage and wedding, you go and you register at places.
Sure. Yeah.
And I remember we registered at Bed Bath & Beyond, and I had no earthly idea what I was getting into.
Yep.
On that afternoon. They gave us this really nice, very excitable lady who was helping us, and we started in kitchen appliances and then went to kitchen tools, and then you get to silverware and plates, and and she was with us for like 45 minutes. This is a very nice lady, very excitable. Thankfully, her shift ended and she left us alone. And we're going through and we're making decision after decision that for the most part I have never given like 18 seconds thought for in my life. And I remember like I'm getting to that point where I'm just done. And we get through towels and we come to bedding. And the back of that particular Birmingham Bed Bath & Beyond had a comforter wall that was, as tall as the store was.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe 15 yards wide, felt like. The entire back corner of the store was just a wall of comforters.
Yes.
And Kelly said, "Which one do you like?" And I just sat on the floor and cried. Because I was like, I can't do it.
All of them.
I'm done. Let me out of here. Whatever you want is exactly,
Yes.
And I feel like that happens to us when we look at that wall of Bibles.
That's true.
Because there's so many. And what do you look? How do you know?
Yeah.
So do a little bit of research. In our show notes, I'm going to put a link to a link that takes you to a page, Bible resources from AmericanBible.org, that gives a brief description of popular Bibles.
Yeah.
And so that'll give you a nice little overview of some of what these versions' history is, give you links for further reading, but they take some of the most popular versions, just list them by alphabetical order and let you make up your mind. Another thing that you can do that I don't think, I can't say I've done all that much pre getting a little bit more academic about it. What do we do when we get a Bible? We pick it up and we just start reading somewhere. We always skip over that front part, the introduction or the preface.
Yeah.
How many of us have ever read that? The answer is probably not that many of us. Good for you. Now, did you read it for class, or did
yes?
and honestly, that's what happens to us.
Yes.
We read it when we have to.
That's right.
Those sections are actually really interesting.
They are.
Because they get into the translation history, the methodology, the reasons they made particular interpretive decisions or not.
Yep.
And in that you can see, okay, is this lining up with what I believe?
Yeah.
Does this get into what I think there is? That is a really, really helpful way to choose. Another thing is, what do you want this Bible for?
Yes.
Is a question you have to ask yourself. Because, if I can be honest, so what one Bible do I need? I think the answer is you need more than one.
Yes.
You need a good, solid study Bible. And you need another one that I would say is more of a modern paraphrase, more in modern English, whether you like the Amplified or the Message, or there's so many good ones out there. Pick a couple.
Yeah.
You might also find a good study Bible that has a particular influence to it, whether it's a life application study Bible that is trying to give you that in addition to notes gives you things that will apply your life.
Yep.
I remember there was an archaeological study Bible. I had one of those teen study Bibles. It was all the bright colors.
Yep. With the
growing
pictures.
Up. Yep.
Yes. Gotta have visuals.
I remember having a kids adventure Bible.
Yes.
That brought in some of that. I wouldn't have called it archaeology and history. I would have called it cool facts at the time.
Yes.
But
it's like the Scholastic newsletters that you would get, and it always had little blurbs with like conversation bubbles over here.
Oh, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
I literally read that till the cover fell off.
Yes.
So get multiple ones that you can study with, because that'll just help you be balanced. And sometimes there'll be seasons of your life where you'll be reading one or the other, but you also might find it to your advantage especially when you're doing a deep dive something, read both.
Yeah. Well, and my top tip, anytime I've ever been asked that question, my top thing is to say, find what's easiest to read, because there is nothing worse than having the Bible in your hand and then reading it in a translation that is not easy for your mind to read and to understand. And a lot of times it may be that you have to go to the bookstore, right, and open some of these translations and say, find your favorite passage maybe, or something like that, and open them and see, does this flow well for me? Is this easy for me to understand? Obviously taking into account all the things we've already talked about today, but it makes it a lot harder to study your Bible if you're sitting down and you are personally for me, the King James Version, the THs at the end of all these words is not easy for me. My mind doesn't work that way. And so I chose something different. And so that may be but if you were raised with the King James Version, that may be easier for you to understand because that's what you're used to. But yeah, find what's easiest for you to understand and to read and to dig into and not overwhelm you.
Yeah, I think another thing that is fun now, because we do have this technology, y'all see, I've got my iPad here. Most of us can find a Bible app for our phones. Download that. Look through some of the versions. If you have a Bible at home, take a little time and do a little comparing with that. Pick a verse that you know well, that's very important to you, that you felt God speak to you, and look at some of the different ways that the translators chose to render that verse. Well, that might, if you find one that hey, that really hits, then maybe that's something you need to investigate a bit more.
Yeah, and there's tools online too. One thing that I like to use, and I'm pretty sure you use it too, is the Blue Letter Bible that's online, and it's an online database that has the translations for you, but it's also got some commentaries, and we won't get into that today, but just some added information,
a lot of resources,
from scholars in the past that have done way more work than I will ever commit to doing. And that's useful too.
It is. It's helpful to know, okay, I can see this word that is translated here, that the King James translated here, and these are the possible translations of it.
And a lot of that too is just deciding, where you land in that, based on what you've learned, what you know to be true, what you have studied in the past. And so, it's studying the Bible can be a lot of fun.
It can.
If you have the right resources and tools to use it. And so that's why we're having conversations like this, is to make it a little bit easier.
It is. And I think the important thing to point out in these, because they're all across the theological spectrum are involved with various of these translations. You'll find some, very conservative prefer this, or some very liberal prefer that. Someone moderate prefers this. But each one of these translators, interpreters, all of them are taking this seriously.
Yep.
None of them took this lightly. They put in the work.
Yep.
And just because we might disagree with how that reads, that doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't
Yep.
make it bad. It just means that's not what our preference is.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's important because again, well, what's the right one? And I want to put on my bathrobe of the dude and say, well, that's just your opinion.
Yeah.
It's a well-informed scholarly opinion on all of these,
Yeah.
but they're making interpretive decisions.
Yep, I agree. All right, well, that wraps us up for today's episode of Consumed by Grace. What do we have next week?
What do we have next week? Next week, so we brought up genre just a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit more about genre because we talked about this. When we take the Bible literally, are we always taking it seriously? And sometimes is taking the Bible literally not actually taking something seriously because the genre is not literal.
Yeah.
So we're going to play around with that a little bit and have a little fun, talk about genre.
That will be fun. All right, join us back next week. All the places you can find us: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, probably many more that we don't even know about.
Probably so. She's the keeps up on all the things that the kids have. Yeah, I've hit my 40s.
The kids these days.
So I'm out on that. Y'all, Consumed by Grace is a podcast of Arab First United Methodist Church. We are proud to be with you. Thank you for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying what you have, share it with a friend.
Yep. And if you have questions, pop them in the comments. We're glad to chat with you about them. All right.
I think we're good. We'll see y'all next week.
See ya.